when you work intentionally and you achieve what you intended to do, I think you're perfectly productive.
Hello, Sales Nation. I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast. On today's episode, we have Chris Bailey, author of The Productivity Project, and he's got an excellent blog over at allyforproductivity.com. We link to all this in the show notes as well over at salesman.red, where he shares his insights he's learned from doing loads of little productivity experiments, from waking up early to limited smartphone use and things of that nature. Essentially, all the experiments that we've talked about with friends and colleagues and family of, I wish I would have done this and I think I'd be better off if I did that. But a lot of the time we get wrapped up in the day-to-day life and we don't put these things into practice. Chris was a right to interview, and with all that said, let's jump into today's episode. Hey Chris, and welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Will, how are you, man?
I'm good, sir. I'm glad to have you on the show. And today I want to talk about productivity. And I don't want to look at this from the angle of, the best way to describe it is probably the BuzzFeed headline of top 5 hacks to improve the amount of emails you can get through each day. I want to look at it from as much as we can, a lifelong perspective to efficiency, productivity, and clearly things like email is going to be involved in that, but email isn't going anywhere. So anything we can put in now that's going to help us in the years to come, I think it's going to be really valuable. But I think the best place to start, Chris, is by asking you, how do I and both the audience know if we're already productive or if we've got loads of room there to improve on all this?
I think everybody has loads of room to improve, regardless of who you are. I've been investing in my productivity for more than a decade, and I still procrastinate. I still do all that stuff, and I still have a lot of room for improvement. But how you measure your productivity is kind of an art more than a science. But I think what it comes down to is intention. And when you work intentionally and you achieve what you intended to do, I think you're perfectly productive. And so that leads to the work that you do, but it also leads to outside of work. So if you intend to have a perfectly relaxing day on a beach somewhere and put your feet up and read a good book or whatever it is that you want to do on the beach, and then you do that, I would argue that you're perfectly productive. And the same is true for work. And so if you want to finish a report, if you want to garner a few new clients over a certain day, and then you do that, I would argue that you're perfectly productive as well, when those intentions come from a valuable and a meaningful place, especially. But I think it really is about intention and how much we accomplish over the course of the day. It's easy to get caught up in the BS BuzzFeed style life hacker headlines out there, and I'm probably guilty of a couple of them too. But the thing about productivity advice is you have to make all the time back that you spend reading that advice back and then some, or else you're basically just looking at productivity porn. And there's a lot of that out there. So you got to wade through quite a bit of it to figure out what works for you.
You're blowing minds already, Chris, because you've literally just turned the whole show that I was planning completely on its head with just one insight of... Are we thinking about all this the wrong way around then? Should we be concentrating on the one thing we want to achieve each day and then just doing that one thing and blocking out everything else and forgetting that perhaps you've got 200 emails?
Yeah.
In reality, you only really need to do 3 of them. The rest of them are just bullshit.
Well, there's a clarity that comes along with realizing that not all of the tasks in our work are created equal. Some we accomplish a disproportionate amount through. And so, I have up here on top of, I would turn the camera around, but I would probably unplug a bunch of cables. But I have a little whiteboard above my monitor, which says the most important tasks in my work in general, as well as the kind of minutia that comes flooding in. And so the most important tasks in my work right now are, writing, promoting my book, doing stuff like that. Speaking is another one. And doing productivity experiments where I can learn and digest new information. Those are the most valuable tasks in my work, and I accomplish infinitely more through them than I do doing things like email or social media or the admin tasks in my work. And so I think there's this tendency to equate busyness with productivity. And certainly when we're busier, we feel more productive. So we get that illusion of productivity. But when you equate productivity with how much you accomplish and working with this intention, busyness is no different from laziness when it doesn't actually lead you to accomplish more on a daily basis. And that's what productivity is. It's accomplishing more on a daily basis, which, if you do that, you'll accomplish more on a general basis as well. The two funnel into one another.
I don't know how into the neuroscience of all this you are, Chris, but why do we feel more productive when we're the paradox is that we're doing more stuff but not being as productive?
I think, when you look at multitasking as a good example of that, our brains have a built-in novelty bias, and we actually release more. I'm happy we can geek out about the brain. The brain science.
I love it. Go as deep as you want.
Okay, all right. Nobody will be listening by the end of it. But we have a built-in novelty bias in our brain where our brain releases more dopamine, which is one of our main pleasure chemicals, once we switch our object of attention from one thing to another. And so because of this, we feel more stimulated when we do things like multitask. And I think that applies to working on more things in general, in the moment as well as in general. We feel busier and we feel more productive. But I think in that way, a lot of the ways that we look at productivity can be broken when you equate productivity with just that busyness. And there is that deep neurological reason that happens. It's because we have that novelty bias and because we're wired to seek that. We look at our evolution, right? If we constantly looked around for threats around us, we were more likely to survive because we would notice the saber-toothed tiger off in the bushes. But today, there aren't many saber-toothed tigers around us, but there are more stressors in our environment than we've ever had before, including in all our evolution. We used to encounter the odd saber-toothed tiger, 50,000, 100,000 years ago. But today, we have a constant barrage of stressors, constant emails coming out. And, they're not as big as a threat, but they're constant. And so they grate at us if we're not careful too.
So if being busy is the enemy and we need to prioritize and focus our attention, and I think attention is probably the key word of all of this, how do we have that attention for longer to complete these tasks when clearly you've got that novelty and your hormones bouncing around your head that are trying to drag you away from it? And I'll put it in context for me of I will sit down, I've got to edit a video podcast, I've got to, for the first 10 minutes is really interesting because I'm reliving the podcast. I'm going, that was a really good point. I should do this, and yada yada. And I'm enjoying listening back to the show. About half an hour into it, then my brain is going, why don't you just go and check your email? Maybe you should do some Instagram posts. Yeah. Maybe you should rewrite this. Maybe you should check your calendar, see what's coming up. And I'm just using willpower. And this clearly can't be the best way with all the research out there that willpower is finite. How can I hack this from that perspective? Is there a way without doing a load of drugs to be able to increase my attention span so I can focus for longer?
I would actually suggest doing a load of drugs. The more drugs, the better. No, I'm just kidding. I think it comes down to changing your environment. And so one of the things that I did when I was writing the latest book that I put out is I wrote most of it while disconnected from the internet. And so that might sound like a kind of a weird thing to do, especially when your work is so heavily researched and it involves coordinating interviews and being a traffic cop in a lot of these different ways. But the research shows that we spend 47% of our time that we're connected to the internet procrastinating for what we're supposed to be doing. And so we leave half of our time on the table. And quite literally, when we're on the internet, things take twice as long because we waste half of that time. And so, there's a certain productivity boost that comes along with eliminating these distractions in the first place. And that's what I found more powerful than anything else, because if your phone is right next to you, it's going to be this black hole of distraction that sucks you in because it's simply more interesting, right? It's like when you fire up Netflix and you have that huge grid of potential things, these little squares that you could dive into to watch. That's like our environment in any given moment. That's how I see our work environment. So we have so many different potential objects that we can focus on. We can focus on email in one tab. We could focus on writing a report in another tab. We could switch our attention to the phone that's next to our desk and pick it up and phone a new client. We have so many different objects of attention. And so being deliberate about what we focus on in the moment is, I think, the key. And
let me just interrupt you there, Chris.
Yeah.
Let's get really practical with this for a second, because I have a couple of rules that have become habits that help with some of this. The Netflix is the best example, in that if I want to watch Netflix, I will, whatever takes my fancy first, I put it on. I don't continue down this rabbit hole of content, because then you realize that, well, that might be slightly better, but this is a bit shorter, and then I get lost. Same when I'm at a restaurant. I will look down the menu, and the first thing I see that I take fancy to, again, I'll order that and I'll just close the menu because I get wrapped up in that. And so I don't know, there's probably some consumer psychology that puts the most expensive meals at the beginning and the end of the menu for that very fact. So I'm probably getting ripped off every time I eat out. But there are two rules that I have had to implement, and now they become habits, and it's almost subconscious. I don't really think about them. But for someone... for the salespeople listening, they are prospecting. They are, trying to learn about their clients online or the potential customer. So they've got to go on Twitter. They've got to go on LinkedIn. In 2016, they've got to go online.
Yeah.
Again, kind of going back to what I mentioned originally, how do we avoid going from LinkedIn to email to that link someone sent you? That falling down off the cliff process. Is there a practical way to do that for, I don't know, for plugins or anything like that in a browser?
Oh, for sure. The best way that I've found is compartmentalizing these different distractions into certain periods throughout the day. And so it's so easy to get into that, that infinite loop where you wake up, you grab your phone, then you bounce around between the same 10 different apps on, a couple different cycles till you clue in to the fact that you're working on autopilot. And that autopilot mode is kind of the enemy of productivity in a lot of different ways, because when we're working on autopilot, we're not being deliberate about what we're spending our time on. And, social media, it's this black hole of validation and distraction and it has every trigger that we need to put off our work and do that instead. And so what I find is compartmentalizing social media into certain periods of time throughout the day, and also onto what devices I can access social media on. So, I have one of these fancy ass iPhones, but I don't have Twitter on it as an example, because I find that I simply waste too much time on Twitter. And I think one of the keys to this is also awareness of how much time we're burning in the first place. And so there's an app called Moment for the iPhone that tracks how many minutes you spend on your iPhone throughout the day. There are similar ones for Android. It tracks how many times you pick up your phone throughout the day, so how many times you unlock it. There's apps like Rescue Time for the computer. It's available for every platform, including on Android. And that makes you aware of just how much time you're wasting. And I think that's the missing piece in a lot of different cases, because when you spend your time on autopilot mode, you're not exactly aware of how you're spending your time. That's what makes it autopilot mode. And so introducing that awareness for how you're spending your time, and then reflecting on, does this fit with whatever it is that my goals were today, with what intentions I set at the beginning of the day. I think that's a good place to start. And to bring the intention bit down to a more practical level as well, one tactic that I find works better than almost any other one on the planet is called the rule of three. And it's a simple intention setting rule. And here it goes. At the start of the day, you fast forward to the end of the day in your head and you ask yourself, by the time the day is done, what three main things will I want to have accomplished? And it does several things. It forces you to separate what's important from what isn't important. Because you can only choose three things, you really get to the bottom of what's important on a day-to-day basis, by challenging yourself to do that. And I also do the same every week. So every Sunday, I look forward to the week ahead, and I think, when it's Friday evening, or evening in my case because I start work a bit later, what three main things will I want to have accomplished? And there's the minutia too. You can't get rid of email. Nobody just gets rid of email, right? Email will always exist. I forget who said this. I heard an interview on a podcast, but somebody said that solving email is like trying to solve rain. Like, the best you can hope to do with rain is control it and put it into buckets and get an umbrella. But this intention, so when everything hits the fan over the course of the week or over the course of the day, you have this guiding light for what's actually important. And that activity, and it's so difficult to work intentionally 100% of the time. Buddhist monks do it pretty well, but normal people like us, we're not so good at it. But
well, it's funny you should say that, because meditation is something that I want to come on to in a minute, Chris. And just to tee that up a little bit, should we be...
Do you meditate?
Yep, I meditate 10 minutes every morning.
Beautiful.
I'll come on to it in a second, because I want to talk about if there is a reason, and I'm sure there is, and I don't do it, and I'm a massive hypocrite because I tell my girlfriend to do this. Should we be scheduling in unproductive time every day, whether it be an hour or 2 hours or whatever it is, to just, I guess, chill out, watch Netflix, do whatever? Or
Netflix and chill.
I guess from that from another perspective, sure. And then from perhaps even a work perspective, should we schedule in an hour every day where then we do all the nonsense stuff? Because salespeople are there to sell, but clearly they are. And this is my experience. They get asked to do reports that are nothing to do with them, are not going to help them or the customers, are not going to help them close more deals, but help some dude up the food chain, justify some. I don't know.
Track things in a spreadsheet.
Yeah, exactly. Some bean counter somewhere helps them out.
Yeah.
So to sum that up, because I've thrown about 5 things at you there, Chris. Should we be scheduling in unproductive time, or should all our time be productive?
I think all of our time should be productive, but not in the way that you probably are thinking. I think all our time should be productive in the way that we're working or living with that deliberateness most of the time. It's impossible to do it 100% of the time, but if your intention is to relax, again, I think that's a productive thing if you end up doing that. But I think the key with separating your mind from your work is to switch contexts enough so that you have the space to daydream. Because, if you think of when you come up with your most creative and brilliant insights, you're not hunkered down on a report. You're not in a call. You're not doing something that requires active thinking. You're in the shower maybe, and an idea comes up brilliantly. Or maybe you're taking a walk and you happen to leave your phone at home. Or maybe you're one of the things that I do is visit art galleries, because and it sounds like a fancy thing to do, but I hate art galleries. I find them the most boring place on the planet because I don't understand art. Who understands art? That's the point of art. But I don't have my phone. I bring a notepad with me, and these thoughts and ideas bubble up to the surface once you give them the space to do so. And you find out interesting ways to approach your work differently. You come up with these brilliant ideas to approach clients differently, to approach the work that you do differently. Whatever it is that you do, getting your mind into that daydreaming mode allows you to connect more dots than just being hunkered down in your work. And so I think that's the key when it comes to taking breaks, is we're missing out on a lot of creativity and hence productivity, because when we work with more creativity, we can work smarter instead of just throwing more energy and time at the work that we do. But it also breaks are also important because, again, the neuroscience shows that we have a limited pool of physiological energy in our brain. And once that pool is depleted, our productivity is toast. And so if we don't take breaks in those cases, our brain will take them for us. Whether on a daily basis, if we try to go too hard on our work, or whether in a general basis where we just burn out after throwing too much energy at our work and not giving ourselves the time to recharge that energy. And so that's where I think breaks are important. But the reason I take them, because I find my work really exciting these days, that every part of my work excites me. I love coming into the office. I'm very. The reason I still take them is because of that creativity, because they give me the space to approach the problems and everything else in my work differently.
So this might come on to meditation now, but again, to get practical.
By the way, have you tried coffee with coconut oil in it? It's very good. I highly recommend it. No, it's just I put like a half tablespoon of coconut oil in my coffee. It's very good, very tasty. Anyway.
Yeah, so we've talked about this on the show. I've had Dave Asprey on the show before to talk about bulletproof coffee, which is essentially MCT oil, which is an extract from coconut oil, butter, and coffee, and the effects on that on the body. I'm not totally sold that it's for everyone.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fat in there. And, I saw a few things that show that it really spikes your cholesterol levels if you're on bulletproof coffee too much. So it might not be the best for your health, but then I'm just saying, it's very delicious.
Dietary cholesterol doesn't necessarily impact your blood levels of cholesterol. And then there's a whole argument. I'm going slightly off topic now, which is fine. But there's a whole argument of your HDL and LDL cholesterol being almost irrelevant from what you can do from a standard blood test. Because to get to the particle size that clog up your arteries, there's very few labs on the entire planet, never mind just in general hospitals, that can spin the blood to get those numbers accurate. So you're making a prediction from what's not there rather than what's there.
And it's not that necessarily things that are high in fat or cholesterol affect your cholesterol too. I saw a study where they had people eat like 20 eggs every day, and then they looked at their cholesterol and it didn't move a blip. And so it's mostly sugar, I think, that affects our cholesterol. So I don't know how the hell it affects our health, but it's probably not that good to eat a lot of butter every day.
I don't know, man. Because it depends what you're replacing and displacing with it.
Yeah.
And this goes for productivity as well. If you're gonna, to use an analogy, if you're gonna replace that morning mad period with something that you feel you're only doing one task but it's less productive, you might be setting yourself up for the rest of the day to be better and more productive because you've not used all your willpower up. Same with diet and food and energy levels on that front. If you're not having pancakes, I'm trying to think what would be a traditional Canadian breakfast.
Oh man, anything with maple syrup on it.
Exactly. So there you're spiking your insulin, you're wrecking your adrenals for the rest of the day.
Sometimes we eat a bowl of maple syrup up here.
Well, for us it's sausage, bacon and eggs, which depending on how they're fried probably aren't that bad. But bring this back to meditation for a second.
Yeah, back to meditation.
How did meditation fall into all this in the context of your day and the breaks that you have? When you say you have a break, does that mean you go to the kitchen, make a cup of oily tea, and then sit down and just stare at the floor? Or do you meditate in part of your breaks, or do you have a completely different approach to all this?
I either switch contexts, so I do something that's totally unrelated. So I clean my office, even if it doesn't need cleaning, because I find that lets me get into that daydreaming mode. I go for a walk. I walk to the coffee shop that's a few blocks away from here and then back, usually without my phone and with a notepad in my pocket instead, because I think the key is to switch context into something that isn't your work, that lets your mind wander a little bit, because that wandering is so crucial, I think. And it sounds counterintuitive, because when you do that, you're not working. But the advantages, especially when your work requires that creativity, like mine does these days, it's invaluable. For meditation, though, it goes back to the point where for every minute you spend investing in your productivity, you have to earn that time back and then some. And that's where I think the power of meditation is even though for every minute you spend on the meditation cushion, you are not doing work. That old disk fragmenter in Windows XP where you'd hit defragment and it would rearrange all the blocks and put them in a nice orderly rectangle. That's what I see meditation as being for our brain. It allows us to defragment all of our thoughts and refocus on on just being there. Because so often we're not, we've heard this a million times before, but we're just not in the present moment. Our mind is thinking or worrying about something that we forgot to do, or it throws a cringeworthy memory at us, at a seemingly random time. Or it's thinking about what we have to do next, or worrying about a meeting coming up, or planning for something, instead of just doing the work, or just living if we're outside of that. And it brings so much more to what we do, because when we bring that clarity and that focus to our work in the moment, we accomplish so much more. And again, it goes back to productivity isn't about how much we produce. It's about how much we accomplish when the day is done, and whether we accomplished what we intended to. And meditation gives us that focus to bring to whatever happens to be in front of us. It allows us to eschew distractions that come up in the moment. It allows us to de-stress. And so when distractions and demands come at us, we can just shake them off. And it's like they didn't come across at all. I remember in the productivity project, I'd been meditating for 5 or 6 years, up to the point when I started the project. And I loved that ritual. It allowed me to lose about 50 pounds. It brought this clarity. It allowed me to de-stress in my life. But when I started the project, I saw the two things as conflicting with one another, because productivity I thought was about doing more, faster, faster, faster. And meditation, you basically do nothing for several minutes at a time. And so I stopped meditating entirely. But after that, I noticed that I was distracted more. I couldn't focus. I took fewer breaks, so I had less energy overall because I didn't recharge. And I invariably accomplished less. And that led me to one of the experiments I conducted to meditate for 35 hours over the course of a week, to see what impact that had on my productivity while doing as much productive work as I possibly could. And in that week, even though I worked fewer hours than most other weeks in the productivity project, I accomplished so much more. And it was the weirdest thing, because I didn't feel productive. But in fact, I actually was productive when I looked at how much I accomplished and whether I had that grip over my intention when I was working throughout the day. And so it's weird, because for tactics like that, and tactics like eating well and exercising and getting enough sleep, very simple things like that, you have to give up some of your time. But there's more to productivity than time. There's attention as well, like we were chatting about, and there's energy, because if you burn out, your productivity is going to be toast. And so productivity, I think, is cultivating all three of those things at the same time. Productivity is a lot of things, but it's that deliberateness that we bring to what we're doing that is key, I think. And
I want to ask you one final question just to round up this part of the show, and that is on meditation. And it's a massively leading question, in that from the conversation we just had, I know you're obviously into your science and you're aware of the studies behind a lot of this perhaps. But for anyone who's listening now, they're driving in their car, they're going, I don't have time to meditate, we've got to get this next sales meeting, I'm stuck in traffic.
Time to meditate. Because for every minute you meditate, you get that time back later on.
I'll come on to that in a second. So for anyone who's, obviously I'm playing devil's advocate here, anyone who's thinking that in their mind or screaming it at us back at the stereo as we're coming out of it, chatting to them, what scientific research, or is there research on meditation that shows that any of this actually exists? Or is it just a woo-woo topic that is just trendy at the moment?
It's amazing how little control we have over our brains. And most people don't realize this, except when they're falling asleep. And they can't fall asleep because their brain won't shut off. But you notice this throughout the day when these thoughts come up. And these cringeworthy memories of something you really shouldn't have said the other day, or whatever it might happen to be. Or when you just can't focus on your work, but you really, really want to. And meditation, the neuroscience behind it is why I do it. Because if there weren't those benefits, I would have given up on the ritual long ago. I have better things to do with my time than meditate if it's some hippy-dippy practice that doesn't lead me to actually accomplish more and enjoy my life more. And I think my favorite study on meditation, the stress relief is amazing, and you feel that right away. The happiness increase is amazing, and you feel that very quickly as well. But the favorite part that I have about meditation is you basically have two main parts in your brain, two main systems. You got the logical part, which is mainly your prefrontal cortex, and you got the emotional part, which is your limbic system and a few other things. So you got the logical part and the emotional part. And so much of our day is a battle between these two things. The logical part of us wants a six pack and to become vice president by next year, and the emotional part wants to play hooky and grab a cheeseburger. And we make an infinite number of decisions throughout the day where we have the choice to prioritize one over the other, where we have the choice to work on something that's more important, like picking up the phone and making a call versus checking email one more time, or whether that happens to be something in our personal life, like choosing that one of those kale salads over a donut or something. And it quite literally, meditation allows us to regain that control over our own brain. And once you kind of clue into how little control you have over your brain, it really is an enlightening insight, if that makes sense. I don't know if any of this makes sense because I'm so steeped in the practice of meditation, but it's incredible how little control we have over what goes on in our heads. And meditation allows us to regain that control. And the benefits of doing that, and the benefits of being able to make better and more productive decisions and being able to focus more and bring more energy to our work are so great that you'll earn all that time back you spend on the meditation cushion or a chair or whatever the hell you do, back and then some.
And just to put this into context from me today. So I slept for about 3 hours last night because I was up late and had to drive my girlfriend to the train station this morning at 5:30. So fine, get on with things. You're my second show to record today, Chris. I've got another 4 lined up. And I've meditated twice today. And if you would have said this to me 3 or 4 years ago, I would have said, you are talking absolute nonsense. But I know for a fact that, because I'm super into all this hacking and testing and experimenting with things as well. And perhaps I need to talk about some of this more on the show, because it'd probably be of interest to a lot of the audience.
Yeah.
But I know for a fact if I'm going to sleep for less than just under 3 hours, which is a couple of sleep cycles for me, I'm better off meditating for that time split over the day instead. My willpower's higher. I'm physically just got more energy, more alive. I'm absolutely crashed by the end of the day, and I need to make up for that sleep. It doesn't replace it, but it's a more efficient way of doing it without being groggy from just having a small sleep in the afternoon, perhaps. And with that, Chris, because I could talk to you about this all day, mate.
I've got a couple of questions. Go on for hours, man.
I've got a couple of questions to ask everyone that comes on the show. So I know you're not an out-and-out salesperson, but of course, everybody has to sell, so you will have some insights to these questions. First one.
I hope so. Let's hope so, right?
Yeah. It's going to be a short segment of the show otherwise. First one, Chris. Who do you think is the world's greatest salesperson?
Oh, my gosh. Oh, man. I'm going to give an answer that's so cliche, but it's, I remember when I was a kid, I would watch basically every Apple event that came out, several times because... And it's not that the products were so great. They're pretty good, but it's because the way that they're positioned is so powerful. And it's one of the reasons I studied marketing in university, is because of Steve Jobs and the way that he presented his products. And sometimes they were no good at all, but the way he sold them, it got you so excited about them. And it's such a, it's come to a point where, Steve Jobs is one of my favorite people. And I used to have one of those pictures, one of those portraits painted out of him, out of Apple products. But whenever I see a quote from Steve Jobs, I kind of, it's another Steve Jobs quote. But I really think that there isn't anyone greater at selling than him, in how he positioned the product and how he actually got you excited about them. And there is his head on the desk in front of you.
You'll laugh at this. His head is here on front of me because to focus the camera,
oh my gosh,
I can't reach the camera and be the chair to focus myself. So I have to put his head on the on the desk in front of me where my head sits. and then focus the camera, and just his head just focuses and the camera picks it up with the auto face detection really well. So that is why he's here. I've not actually read this book. I'm horrified at how long it is and how many months it's going to take me to get into it, but I'm sure it's pretty good. With that, Chris,
you must look like a crazy person before, when you set up the show. If somebody walked in on you moving this book around and focusing, they would think you're a crazy man.
Well, they do. And even more crazy, some of the audience will know this if they follow me on Snapchat and perhaps Instagram. You can't see it here, Chris, but this is essentially my living room. So I've got my TV, hi-fi over there. There's a dartboard up on the wall, family photos, surround sound, electric drums behind this. I'll show you on the webcam when we wrap up.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I like this about the whole media side of things, because a lot of it is absolute smoke and mirrors. It's nonsense. And so hopefully I can add value to some of the audience by showing them what we're doing. And from that perspective, I've got no shame in Steve Jobs being my autofocus head. And this will make no sense for anyone who's listening onto the audio side of things. So you need to come check it out on YouTube. I've got one final question for you, Chris. And that's something I've asked everyone that's come on the show so far. And that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
I would say just... better at selling. It's going to take me a bit to think about this one. You'll have to fill the dead air. I think just only sell things that you actually have confidence in. Because when you have that confidence in something, I think the thing sells itself because you're enthusiastic about it, because you're actually into it, and because people will trust you more if you sell things you're confident that are actually good. I don't know if that's a good answer, but
that's a fantastic answer.
That would be the advice I would give.
It's a fantastic answer. It's a really candid one as well. Of course, we have sales experts that come on the show, and they've been asked that question a bunch of times. So they got this weird pre-prepared answer, which I need to then ask why about 5 times to get levels deeper. But I appreciate that, and it is something that's important. There'll be a lot of salespeople listening. Then I've gone about it, I've banged on about it a whole bunch of times, that probably aren't confident in their product or service, but they're making great money selling it, and they don't feel responsible for it because it's not their company. And I think that all adds up, and these little stresses, which you mentioned earlier in the show, they all add up, and I think they build up over time. And I think that's when you find yourself at 35, 40, not particularly happy with the direction that you're going with things. And I think that's when people have midlife sales crisis, perhaps, if they're going to be a career salesperson. And I've always worked for the best companies in the medical device industry, bar none. I went from the biggest company to the competitor, who in certain industries is even better. And that's all I've ever known. And that's been a very conscious choice from my end. And so I appreciate that really candid answer, Chris. And with that, mate, I want you to tell us a little bit about your book and where the audience can find out more about you as well, because a really entertaining interview, and I'm sure they're going to want to know more.
I wish I had a copy here. One sec. It's funny. I have a whole bookshelf behind me, like a whole shelf of it. If you're looking at the video, is of my book. It's the douchiest thing ever. But this is my book. It's called The Productivity Project. It's published by Penguin Random House in most countries around the world. We're even translating it into a few different languages. And so if you dig my approach to productivity, to getting stuff done, that it doesn't have to be this thing that's so cold and corporate and all about efficiency, that it's about just accomplishing more and working with intention every day, on what you actually care about and what's important, that the book is for you. That's my book.
Amazing. Share your website URL as well, because there's loads of epic content on there.
I need to get better at selling. We were chatting.
You need to listen to the show more often.
Yeah, I do. I need to subscribe. My site is alifeofproductivity.com. I post there. I'm posting there a bit less than I used to, maybe once a week or so, but I'm constantly cranking out stuff for them whenever I have a new thought about productivity, which is quite often, especially when I switch into that mind wandering mode throughout the day. And so that's where I write. My book is The Productivity Project. I also do I just launched productivity courses, and so where I go into your workplace and will help you make your team or your organization more productive. And the feedback, it has been incredible on that so far, because I think when people realize that there's more to productivity than just managing your time, that it can be about attention and energy too. I think a lot of folks are receptive to that idea, and the feedback we've got is they actually help. And so I do some courses and speaking and stuff like that too. But the book is The Productivity Project, and alifeofproductivity.com is my site.
Amazing stuff. We'll link to both of them in the show notes of this episode over at salesman.red. And with that, Chris, I want to thank you for your time today, and I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Chris, for joining us on the show. I appreciate the wandering nature of the conversation. I always enjoy it when we go down some rabbit holes like we did today. You tested my ability to drag us back on track as an interviewer. It was good fun. And I want to thank you, as always, Sales Nation, the listeners, the viewers, for tuning in. Massively appreciate your time and attention. And with that, I'll speak with you all again tomorrow.